The snap came before the applause. It was sharp, unmistakable, slicing through the velvet hush of the charity hall like a warning no one understood yet. For half a second, the sound hovered in the air before meaning rushed in behind it. The woman on stage stiffened, her breath catching as the seam along the side of her gown gave way, fabric parting just enough to turn admiration into shock. A ripple moved through the audience, gasps, stifled laughter, phones lifting on instinct. The light seemed suddenly too bright, too eager. What should have been a triumphant night collapsed into a spectacle of humiliation in less than a heartbeat. Handlers rushed forward with coats and practiced smiles, murmuring reassurances that fooled no one. The woman's face burned as she stood frozen, her mind racing faster than the cameras clicking. Years of discipline had trained her to remain composed, yet something about the tear felt deliberate, surgical, as if the dress itself had been waiting for this moment. Applause finally came, thin and confused, more reflex than support. Most people were already rewriting the night in their heads, an unfortunate accident, a viral moment, something to joke about later. In the third row, a little girl did not laugh. She did not lift a phone or glance away out of politeness. She leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed not on the woman's face but on the edge of the torn seam, on the tiny frayed threads curling outward like exposed nerves. Her brow furrowed, not with surprise but recognition. The stitch pattern tugged at something buried deep in her memory, something taught in quiet moments when the world felt safer than it really was. She remembered hands older than her own guiding a needle through cloth, a voice low and careful saying, "Look closely. Weak thread lies before it breaks." At the time, it had felt like a game. Now it felt like a warning resurfacing too late. The girl's fingers curled in her lap as the room buzzed around her. She counted the stitches she could see from where she sat, too few, too shallow, reinforced with the wrong fiber. Not a mistake. A choice. The woman was ushered off stage, the curtains drawing closed with an almost theatrical urgency. People leaned toward one another, whispering theories, delighting in the drama. The girl's gaze drifted beyond the stage, toward the narrow strip of darkness at the side where crew members moved quickly, heads down. She noticed things others didn't, the way one assistant avoided eye contact, the way another kept glancing toward the emergency exit behind the stage. The exit door was shut. It should have been open. Her chest tightened. A sense she knew too well crept in, the same feeling she had felt years ago when adults insisted everything was fine even as danger gathered quietly at the edges. She shifted in her seat, heartbeat loud in her ears, and for the first time that night, fear outweighed curiosity. If the dress was meant to fail, then the moment wasn't over. It was only beginning. Before anyone could announce a break or smooth over the incident, the girl slid off her chair and moved toward the aisle, small and unnoticed, carrying a knowledge far heavier than her size suggested. The hallway outside the main hall smelled faintly of perfume and polished wood, a contrast to the unease tightening in the little girl's chest. She stayed close to the wall as people streamed past her, their conversations already reshaping the incident into something harmless. "Bad tailoring," one man said with a laugh. "Unlucky timing," another replied. The girl kept walking, her mind replaying the image of the seam again and again, the way the thread had split cleanly instead of stretching. Cheap polyester. Fast work. Intent. As she moved, a memory pressed forward uninvited. She was smaller then, sitting cross-legged on a narrow bed in a dim apartment, watching her grandmother stitch by the light of a single lamp. The old woman's hands trembled sometimes, not from age alone but from restraint, from holding back stories she didn't want to tell a child too soon. Good dresses fail slowly, her grandmother had said, testing the seam with a firm pull. Bad ones fail loud. And the loud ones are never accidents. The girl hadn't fully understood, but she had nodded anyway, trusting the weight behind the words. Now that weight settled heavily on her shoulders. She reached the corner where the backstage corridor began and paused, peering around it. The hum of generators vibrated through the floor, a low, anxious sound. Crew members moved with purpose, some whispering into headsets, others pretending not to notice the tension sharpening the air. The emergency exit at the end of the corridor caught her eye again. A red sign glowed above it, steady and misleading. She could see the latch from here. It was turned inward. Her throat went dry. Another flashback surfaced, sharper this time. A school gym filled with smoke, alarms blaring too late, teachers shouting contradictory instructions. She remembered being pulled toward an exit that wouldn't open, remembered the panic rising as adults struggled with a mechanism they had never practiced using. Afterward, inspectors came and left, promises were made, and nothing changed. She learned then that danger often wore the disguise of oversight. She took a step forward, then another, small shoes barely making a sound on the polished floor. As she passed a storage alcove, she heard hushed voices. An assistant stood with her back turned, fingers moving quickly over something metallic, lighting cables, half hidden by a rolling rack of equipment. The woman's shoulders were rigid, her movements jerky, as if time itself were pressing on her. The girl stopped, instinct telling her to stay hidden. A bead of sweat rolled down the assistant's temple despite the cool air. "It's done," the woman whispered into her headset, voice cracking. "The dress failed. Just like you said." She listened, nodding rapidly, then added, "Yes, the exit's secured." No one noticed. Her laugh was thin, brittle, breaking at the edges. The girl's heart pounded so hard she feared it would give her away. The pieces aligned with a clarity that frightened her. The wardrobe mishap wasn't the end, it was the opening move. Humiliation to draw attention. Confusion to buy time. Locked exits to control the flow of bodies when panic inevitably followed. She thought of her grandmother again, of the night the old woman finally broke her silence. "People who sabotage don't see faces," she had said softly. "They see outcomes. If you ever notice the signs, you must decide quickly what kind of person you'll be." At the time, the girl had asked if that was scary. Her grandmother had smiled sadly. "Only if you pretend you don't see." The girl stepped out from behind the alcove. "Polyester thread," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "You used it because it snaps clean when the weight shifts." The assistant spun around, eyes wide, breath hitching as if caught in a trap. For a moment, neither of them moved. The corridor felt suddenly too narrow, the hum of the generators too loud. The girl held the woman's gaze, knowing that once spoken, the truth could not be pulled back like a stitch gone wrong. The assistant stared at the little girl as though she were seeing a ghost, something impossible and therefore terrifying. Her mouth opened, then closed again, words failing to assemble themselves. For a heartbeat, the corridor existed in a strange stillness, suspended between discovery and disaster. Then the assistant's shoulders sagged, the tension in her arms loosening just enough to betray exhaustion rather than defiance. "You shouldn't be here," she muttered, more to herself than to the child. Her fingers trembled as they hovered near the exposed cables. "This isn't your problem." The girl didn't move closer, but she didn't step back either. She had learned that adults often mistook silence for obedience. "It is," she said simply. "When exits are locked, it always is." Something in her tone, too calm, too certain, cut through the assistant's panic. The woman swallowed hard and glanced down the corridor toward the stage, then back at the door. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I was told it would just be embarrassing. A distraction. They said no one would get hurt." The girl's eyes flicked again to the latch at the end of the hall. "That's what they always say," she replied. The words weren't accusatory, they were factual, shaped by memory rather than judgment. Another flashback surged forward, unbidden, flames licking at factory walls, alarms drowned out by machinery, her father lifting her and pushing her toward a window while smoke filled the room. Later, officials called it an accident. Later still, she learned what shortcuts looked like when they cost lives. The assistant's breath came faster. "I needed the money," she said, the confession spilling out as if once started it could not be stopped. "They knew that. They knew about my daughter's treatments. They promised this would be quick, clean. The dress, the exit, it was supposed to buy time, nothing more." "Time for what?" the girl asked. The woman hesitated, then laughed weakly. "For her to stop talking. For the story to change." Her gaze drifted toward the stage again, toward the woman whose name had filled headlines both flattering and cruel. She was going to expose them tonight. Financial records. Names. They couldn't risk that. The hum beneath the floor deepened, a warning the girl felt in her bones. Lights flickered faintly overhead, just enough to draw the assistant's attention back to the cables. She reached out instinctively, as if to finish what she'd started. The girl took a step forward then, her small hand closing around the woman's wrist with surprising firmness. "No," she said, quietly but with finality. "If those lights overheat, smoke fills the hall first. People panic. They run to exits they can't use." She loosened her grip but didn't let go. "That's how this ends." Tears welled in the assistant's eyes, carving clean lines through the makeup she'd applied that morning with such care. "I didn't think." "Thinking comes before," the girl said. "Choosing comes after." For a moment, it seemed the assistant might pull away, might call for help or shove the child aside. Instead, her hand dropped to her side. She covered her face, shoulders shaking as the weight of the situation crashed down on her all at once. "What do I do?" she whispered, the question raw and unguarded. The girl released her wrist and looked once more at the exit door. She knew the mechanism behind it, an old model, stiff if not maintained, requiring a precise sequence to disengage the lock. She had watched a maintenance worker struggle with one just like it years ago, memorizing the motions without realizing why. "You tell me who told you," the girl said. "And you let me open that door." The assistant nodded, a broken, desperate movement. Somewhere in the distance, a voice crackled over a loudspeaker, calling for calm, promising the program would resume shortly. The girl felt the clock ticking, each second narrowing the space for mistakes. She turned toward the exit, already reaching for the latch, knowing that once she started, there would be no turning back. The metal of the exit latch was colder than the girl expected, its chill seeping into her fingers as she examined it closely. The assistant stood a step behind her now, silent, eyes darting between the door and the darkened corridor as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. The red sign above the exit hummed faintly, the deceptive promise of safety. The girl ignored it and focused on the mechanism itself, on the narrow seam where the panel met the frame. Another memory rose, clearer than the rest. She was 8, sitting on the floor of a community center after an evacuation drill gone wrong. A maintenance worker had knelt by an identical door, muttering under his breath as he pried it open. She had watched every movement then, not out of interest but because fear sharpened her attention. "You see this," he'd said to no one in particular, tapping the latch. "It jams if you force it. You've got to release the pressure first." He'd shown her, absent-mindedly, as adults often did when they thought children weren't really listening. Now she released the pressure. The latch resisted at first, a stubborn refusal that made her heart jump. She adjusted her grip, remembering the exact angle of the man's wrist, the slight pause before the final turn. With a soft click that sounded almost too small for its importance, the mechanism shifted. The door loosened under her hands. At that precise moment, the lights overhead flickered again, this time longer, dimming the corridor into a pulsing gray. The assistant gasped. "It's starting," she whispered. The girl pushed the door open just enough to feel the rush of cooler air from outside. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by urgency. She wedged it wider and glanced back. "You need to tell security what you did," she said. "Now." The assistant hesitated, fear warring with shame. Before she could answer, the distant murmur of the audience rose into something sharper, more anxious. A faint smell of burning plastic drifted through the hall. The girl's chest tightened. She had felt that smell before. It always came before the shouting. The assistant straightened suddenly, as if making a decision she had been avoiding all night. "I will," she said hoarsely. "I promise." She turned and ran toward the stage, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. The girl stayed where she was, bracing the door open with her body. She imagined what would happen if it closed again, people pressing against it, panic turning orderly rows into chaos. Her arms ached, but she didn't move. Another flashback surfaced, gentler this time. Her grandmother's voice, calm even in warning. "Sometimes saving people looks like standing still," she had said. holding something open long enough for others to pass. The alarms finally screamed to life, piercing and relentless. Doors burst open down the hall as security personnel rushed past the girl, some shouting into radios, others waving people toward the exit she had opened. Confusion rippled outward, but there was a path now, a clear one, and bodies began to flow through it. The girl stepped aside as people poured past her, their faces pale, their eyes wide. No one noticed her. No one thanked her. She didn't expect them to. She watched until the corridor emptied, until the smell faded and the light stabilized, until the danger receded into a shaky aftermath. Only then did she allow herself to sit down against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, breathing hard. The door remained open beside her, a quiet testament to a choice made in time. The chaos that followed moved like a wave, fast, loud, then suddenly gone, leaving behind a strange, hollow quiet. The girl remained seated against the wall long after the last footsteps faded, listening to her own breathing slowly return to normal. Her arms trembled now that they no longer had a door to hold open, the delayed reaction of fear finally catching up. She pressed her palms together, grounding herself the way her grandmother had taught her when memories threatened to spill over. Security voices echoed distantly, urgent but controlled. Somewhere, a supervisor was demanding answers. Somewhere else, someone was crying. The girl closed her eyes, and another flashback slipped in without permission. This one was softer, heavier. A kitchen filled with the smell of starch and hot fabric. Her grandmother sitting across from her, mending a dress that wasn't theirs, shaking her head as she worked. They pay extra for silence, the old woman had said, not looking up. But silence always costs more in the end. The girl had asked who they were. Her grandmother had only replied, people who think embarrassment is safer than truth. Footsteps approached, slower this time. The girl opened her eyes to see the woman from the stage standing a few feet away, no longer surrounded by handlers or cameras. The torn gown had been replaced by a plain coat pulled tightly around her, but her posture was still composed, her presence still commanding in a quieter way. Her gaze settled on the open exit door, then shifted to the child sitting beside it. That door should have been locked, the woman said softly. It was, the girl replied. The woman studied her more closely now, noticing details others might miss, the careful way the child held herself, the steadiness in her eyes that didn't match her age. They told me it was a wardrobe malfunction, she said. But I knew. Her voice wavered just slightly. I've lived long enough to know when humiliation is engineered. The girl nodded. She didn't offer comfort. She had learned that some truths needed space, not reassurance. The woman took a step closer and crouched down so they were eye level. You saw it too, she said, not as a question. The stitching, the girl said. And the door. A flicker of something, respect, recognition, passed through the woman's expression. Why didn't you tell someone right away? The girl hesitated, then answered honestly. Adults argue first. The woman let out a short, breathless laugh that quickly faded. You're right, she said. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, edges worn as if it had been handled many times. I was going to read this tonight, she said. Names. Numbers. Proof. She looked down at it, then back at the girl. Someone wanted to make sure no one listened. The girl felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that came whenever she recognized a pattern she wished didn't repeat itself. They use distractions, she said quietly. So people forget to ask why. The woman's jaw tightened. They won't forget this time. In the distance, voices grew louder as officials approached. The woman stood, offering the girl a hand. The girl took it, allowing herself to be pulled to her feet. For a brief moment, their hands remained clasped, a silent acknowledgement of something shared and unspoken. The girl knew this wasn't the end. It was only the moment when the story changed direction. The corridor filled again, not with panic this time but with purpose. Security officers moved methodically, radios crackling, eyes sharper now that the outline of a threat had taken shape. The woman from the stage stepped aside as they passed, her presence still commanding attention even without a spotlight. The girl followed her silently, aware that the night had shifted from chaos to reckoning. They were led into a small conference room near the back of the venue. The air inside felt heavy, charged with questions waiting to be asked. The assistant sat at the table already, shoulders hunched, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white.
You use cheap polyester thread. My grandma warned me people do that when they want something to fail on cue.
Something like relief and shame crossing her face at once. That's her, the assistant said quickly, before anyone else could speak. She's the one who figured it out. The girl stiffened at the sudden attention. The woman placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a quiet reassurance. Start from the beginning, the woman said to the assistant, her voice calm but unyielding. And don't skip anything. The assistant swallowed hard. She spoke of the phone calls that had started weeks earlier, of vague promises and veiled threats. She described the man who never met her in person, who spoke in careful language about optics and timing. He said the dress just needed to fail, she said, eyes glistening. A moment of embarrassment. Enough to derail her speech. She nodded toward the woman. Then he asked about the exits. Said it was just a precaution. The girl listened, every word tightening the knot in her chest. She had heard versions of this story before, in courtrooms and news reports, always ending with apologies that came too late. A flashback surfaced, her grandmother watching a televised apology, muttering, "They always sound surprised when consequences arrive." One of the officers leaned forward. "Why agree to the exits?" he asked. The assistant's voice broke. "Because I told myself nothing would happen. Because I needed the money. Because they knew exactly how to ask." She looked at the girl again, tears spilling freely now. "I didn't think a child would see through it." The woman from the stage met the girl's eyes. "You didn't just see through it," she said quietly. "You stopped it." The girl shook her head. "I held a door open," she said. "That's all." "No," the woman replied. "You changed the outcome." She turned back to the officers. "Everything she said can be corroborated," she added. "The documents I was going to present tonight, names, transactions, they point to the same people." The room fell silent as the weight of that settled. This wasn't just about a torn dress or a locked exit anymore. It was about a pattern of control, of using spectacle to bury truth. The girl felt a familiar mix of anger and resolve. She had felt it the day she learned why the factory fire had never led to arrests, why inspections had been signed off without visits. As officers escorted the assistant out, the woman knelt in front of the girl once more. "What's your name?" she asked. The girl hesitated. Names had power. Names could invite questions she wasn't ready to answer. Still, she gave it. The woman nodded slowly, committing it to memory. "People will want to know who you are," she said. "They'll call you brave. A hero." The girl looked down at her hands. "Will they listen?" she asked. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she squeezed the girl's shoulder gently. "This time," she said, "they have no choice." By the time the girl stepped back into the main hall, it no longer felt like the same place. The lights were dimmer, no longer theatrical but functional, casting long shadows across rows of half-empty chairs. Programs lay abandoned on the floor, glossy covers creased by hurried footsteps. What had been designed as an evening of elegance now carried the quiet residue of almost disaster. She walked slowly, senses alert, the way she always became after danger passed. This was when people missed things, when relief made them careless. She noticed the scorch mark near one lighting rig, faint but real, and the way a technician stared at it too long before looking away. She noticed how conversation stopped when the woman from the stage appeared, how eyes followed her not with pity now, but with unease. Humiliation had been replaced by something far more dangerous to the people who feared her: credibility. The woman moved toward the podium again, not to speak yet, but to reclaim space. She placed her hands on the lectern, grounding herself, and for a brief moment the girl saw the weight she carried, the years of being doubted, the careful patience it took to wait for the right moment to tell the truth. A flashback flickered in the girl's mind, not her own this time but imagined, the woman younger, standing in another hall years ago, blindsided by a scandal she hadn't caused, watching her reputation fracture while the real culprit stayed hidden. The pattern was familiar. It always was. A security officer leaned in to whisper something to the woman. She nodded once, sharply. The room shifted again. Phones came back out, not for mockery now but for documentation. People sensed it instinctively, the story was changing, and they didn't want to miss the turn. The girl drifted to the side, closer to the wall. She preferred edges. From there, she could see the whole picture without being in it. Her mind replayed the assistant's confession, the careful language used to justify harm. Just embarrassment. The phrase echoed with bitter irony. She thought of her grandmother's voice, low and firm, "They always start by stealing dignity. Safety comes next." A man in an expensive suit spoke urgently into his phone near the back of the hall, his face pale. The girl watched him pace, watched the way his hand shook when he realized the exits were now open, the staff cooperating, the narrative slipping out of his control. Foreshadowing settled into certainty. Whoever had orchestrated this had underestimated two things: preparation, and children who listened when adults spoke carelessly. The woman at the podium finally lifted her head. She hadn't begun speaking yet, but the room had already gone quiet. The girl felt it, the moment before a truth drops, when everyone senses something irreversible is about to happen. The woman's gaze swept the audience, steady and unafraid, then flicked briefly toward the side of the room where the girl stood. It wasn't gratitude in her eyes. It was recognition. The girl's chest tightened unexpectedly. She wasn't used to being seen this way, not as a problem to manage, not as a bystander, but as part of the reason the night hadn't ended in tragedy. She shifted her weight, suddenly unsure where she belonged in what came next. The woman inhaled, fingers brushing the folded paper still tucked safely inside her coat. Tonight, the truth would be spoken, not because the plan had worked, but because it had failed. And the girl knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that once words were unleashed, there would be no stitching this story back together. The murmurs in the hall had grown into a quiet tension, the kind that presses on the chest without sound. The woman stepped up to the microphone, and for a moment, the room felt suspended, waiting for her to speak. The girl stayed to the side, watching, sensing the shift. Every movement was deliberate, the careful placement of notes, the straightening of shoulders, the inhalation before the first word. It was a performance, but one sharpened by truth and necessity rather than artifice. Her mind flashed back to another memory, her grandmother holding a different kind of microphone years ago, standing before neighbors to warn them of fire hazards ignored by officials. People had dismissed the voice because it came from someone small, someone unexpected. That lesson had never left her. Size and age were not shields, they were lenses through which truth could either be ignored or, sometimes, illuminated. The woman's voice broke the silence, steady at first, then rising with conviction. She spoke of the gala, the dress, the sabotage, but she didn't linger there. Her words began to outline a web of deceit, corruption hidden beneath layers of ceremony and public favor. The girl noticed how the audience shifted, leaning forward, drawn into the unraveling thread. Curiosity loops clicked into place, no one could look away. Every sentence promised more, every pause begged attention. A subtle sound near the back caught the girl's ear, the soft scuff of shoes approaching. She turned just enough to see the assistant, escorted by security, hands raised in an automatic gesture of compliance, yet eyes wide with disbelief. For a split second, the assistant's gaze met the girl's. Gratitude, shame, and fear all collided there, a silent acknowledgement of what had occurred. The girl blinked and looked away, focusing on the stage. She didn't want to be noticed. The flashbacks came more insistently now, layered atop one another, her parents' fire, the factory shortcuts, her grandmother's lessons in seeing danger, remembering it, acting before it spread. Each memory fused into clarity, reinforcing the decision she had made tonight. The girl realized the choreography of disaster could be seen in small details, patterns, repetitions, signs adults ignored or dismissed. Observation wasn't enough. Timing was everything. On stage, the woman's words drew lines that connected what no one had noticed: the dress, the locked exit, the orchestrated distractions. The audience's faces reflected the shift from curiosity to alarm to comprehension. Phones were raised again, this time not to capture humiliation but to bear witness. The microphones and cameras of the hall became instruments amplifying truth instead of scandal. Each click, each flash, added tension, micro cliffhanger blooming in real time. The girl stayed hidden, silent, but her awareness was total. She noted the slight tremor in the sponsor's hand, the subtle glance exchanged between two high-profile guests, the ripple of discomfort as they realized how thoroughly the plan had failed. Foreshadowing from earlier in the night, the torn seam, the locked exit, the assistant's nervous glances, converged with devastating clarity. What had seemed random now appeared intentional, orchestrated, and yet undone by a child who had simply noticed. As the woman concluded her revelation, applause rose, but filtered through astonishment, not routine admiration. Some faces turned pale, some eyes filled with tears, some hands gripped programs so tightly they crumpled. The girl felt a deep satisfaction, a quiet confirmation, observation, courage, and timing had rewritten the evening. And though she remained in the shadows, unnoticed by most, her impact was undeniable. The night had shifted completely. The gala, once a carefully orchestrated display of elegance and influence, now bore the weight of exposure. Conversations whispered in corners, phones glowed with evidence being shared, and the air vibrated with a mix of awe and disbelief. The little girl stood near the edge of the hall, her small frame nearly invisible, yet every fiber of her attention was alert. She had become a quiet fulcrum around which the events of the night now pivoted. Her mind returned to memories long buried, sharper than the polished floors beneath her feet. She remembered the fire that had taken her parents, the way she had been lifted from chaos by the narrow attention of a few capable hands. She remembered how quickly adults overlooked details that mattered most. And she remembered her grandmother, whose soft voice had taught her to see patterns invisible to the untrained eye.
You knew.
All those lessons converged now in the quiet calculation of her awareness. In the far corner, a man in a tailored suit whispered hurriedly into a phone, his expression taut with panic. The girl's eyes followed him, noting the subtle tremor in his hand, the hesitation in his stride. Patterns. Repetition. She had learned to read these signs early, the micro-behaviors adults tried to mask under composure. They revealed intent more clearly than words ever could. The woman from the stage moved through the audience now, collecting documents, conferring quietly with officials, directing attention. Her presence was magnetic, but measured. Each step, each gesture, reinforced authority and composure. The little girl watched, knowing that without her quiet intervention at the door, this order would have descended into chaos. Panic would have been real, injury possible. Timing had been everything, and it had been her hands that held the moments together. A soft voice beside her startled her. The assistant, still shaken but relieved, whispered, You saved more than just her." The girl nodded slightly, not needing to elaborate. The recognition was enough. She had acted without expectation of acknowledgement, guided by instinct honed over years of observing the consequences of negligence. Her grandmother's lessons about courage had always included discretion. The right act is its own reward, unseen and uncompensated. The hum of the hall, once the subtle undercurrent of expectation, now carried the low buzz of unfolding truth. Micro-cliffhanger abounded everywhere, glances exchanged between sponsors, whispered admissions, the audible realization that no one could reconstruct the intended humiliation. The girl noticed each detail, aware that these small reactions would ripple into consequences far beyond the hall itself. Her attention drifted back to the stage for a final glance. The woman stood upright, delivering words that carried authority, clarity, and undeniable truth. Phones recorded. Eyes watched. Evidence spread. And in the midst of it all, the little girl, quiet and unremarkable in appearance, held within her the memory, the awareness, and the calm that had kept catastrophe at bay. In this room, she was the fulcrum, unseen yet central, the pivot upon which chaos had been averted. The aftermath settled slowly, like dust drifting in still air. The gala hall, stripped of pretense, felt smaller, quieter, yet charged with the weight of what had almost happened. Guests lingered in clusters, some speaking in urgent whispers, others staring silently at the stage where the woman now moved with a mixture of relief and resolve. The little girl remained near the edge of the room, unnoticed, her gaze flicking from one detail to another, the placement of a fallen program, the subtle tension in a guest's shoulders, the way shadows clung to corners. A flashback intruded, heavier this time, almost suffocating in its clarity. She was 7, standing outside a factory engulfed in smoke, her father shouting above the roar as he shoved her toward an exit that refused to open. She remembered the heat, the panic, the weight of helplessness pressing against her chest. And she remembered the small, precise movements that had eventually saved her, remembering, observing, acting in time. Those memories, once fear, now felt like a blueprint. Each decision she had made tonight followed that same structure: recognize, anticipate, act. Her eyes found the assistant again, standing near the back, hands clasped, shoulders tight. Relief was etched into her features, but so was lingering guilt. The girl had expected nothing from her, yet there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the truth: tonight had been averted because someone had seen what others ignored. The girl's chest tightened with the familiar mix of pride and restraint. Recognition was fleeting, the weight of responsibility never was. The woman from the stage approached her quietly, kneeling down to meet her at eye level. "You held the line when no one else could see it," she said softly. "Do you understand what that means?" Her voice carried a gravity that made the girl nod slowly, absorbing without embellishment. The woman's eyes softened, just slightly, as if she were measuring the child's worth not by words, but by the calm certainty that had guided her hands. The girl thought of her grandmother, of lessons whispered beside dim lamps: details save lives. Timing makes the difference. And the right choice often goes unnoticed. That wisdom had guided her tonight, keeping chaos at bay while adults argued and overlooked. She realized, almost with relief, that the lesson had been fulfilled. Observation and courage, applied with precision, had altered the course of events. Voices rose around them again, this time not in panic but in controlled activity. Officials were coordinating, staff were moving, and guests were beginning to understand the reality behind the spectacle. Phones were out, recording evidence, ensuring that the story would spread as truth rather than rumor. The girl watched, internalizing each movement, aware that the ripple of this night would extend far beyond the walls of the hall. The woman from the stage reached out her hand, tentative yet deliberate. The girl took it, allowing herself a brief grounding in the human connection she rarely sought. There was no fanfare, no applause, only a silent acknowledgement of the invisible heroics that had kept tragedy at bay. In that brief contact, the girl felt the weight of her actions balanced against the quiet satisfaction of precision, of timing, of knowing that she had done exactly what needed to be done. Weeks had passed since the gala, but the echoes of that night lingered like shadows in sunlight. Headlines now celebrated the woman's courage, the exposure of corruption, the narrow avoidance of disaster, but almost no one mentioned the child who had quietly held a door open while chaos threatened to erupt. The little girl moved through her days with the same measured awareness she had always carried, noticing small details, anticipating outcomes, but rarely speaking of her role. She had no desire for recognition; the satisfaction of action, of timing, of lives redirected from harm, was enough. Flashbacks surfaced at unexpected moments: her parents' factory, the fire, the locks and exits she had studied as a child, the lessons whispered by her grandmother. Each memory layered itself into her understanding of patterns and consequences. She realized that, in observing and acting, she had repeated the choreography of survival she had learned over years of quiet preparation. It wasn't luck. It wasn't accident. It was awareness. She sometimes watched television clips of the gala, seeing the woman at the podium, delivering words with precision, authority, and clarity. The girl noticed small details adults missed: the subtle nod to security, the way the microphone was angled, the fleeting glance at the side exit that had once been a potential trap. Each detail confirmed what she already knew: her intervention had altered the night's trajectory, but the world would rarely see her hand in it. One evening, she passed a newsstand where the story of the gala was displayed in bold letters. Crowds were gathered, reading, discussing, sharing their disbelief at the audacity of the sabotage and the bravery of the woman who exposed it. The girl lingered, quiet and unobtrusive, aware that she had witnessed the machinery behind it all. Patterns of deceit, control, and distraction were visible to her in a way they weren't to the adults consumed by spectacle and headlines. Her mind drifted to the assistant who had confessed, the brief moment of acknowledgement exchanged between them. The assistant had survived the night with a mixture of guilt and relief. The girl had seen to that. It was a small justice, a quiet accountability, and it settled in her chest like a stone that both grounded and weighted her. Recognition by those who had nearly caused harm was enough. The rest of the world could wait. The woman from the stage occasionally spoke of the child in private, in moments when cameras were off and the applause had ended. She called her remarkable, perceptive, brave, but never in front of crowds, never in headlines. The girl had never sought fame, she had sought understanding and action. That distinction mattered. Heroes, she thought, were often invisible. And so the girl continued, moving through life as she always had, observant, precise, aware of patterns others missed. The gala had been a moment of testing, a night when her training in attention, timing, and quiet courage had been applied perfectly. The world around her remained unaware, yet she carried the memory of her actions like a secret backbone, a private compass guiding her through situations both ordinary and extraordinary. Her chest tightened slightly, a familiar ache that now came with calm rather than panic. She understood fully, the night had been rewritten because she had chosen, because she had acted when adults argued, because she had seen the small signs others overlooked. And in that knowledge, she found a quiet triumph, a personal story no headline could capture. The gala was officially over, but the aftermath continued to ripple far beyond the hall. Investigations into the charity's sponsors were underway, news outlets reported on the sabotage, and the woman from the stage was being lauded not only for her courage but for her meticulous presentation of truth. Yet amid all the attention, the little girl remained largely invisible, moving through the world as she always had, small, quiet, and profoundly aware. She had learned long ago that impact didn't require applause. That evening, as the crowd dispersed and the last of the security personnel exited, the girl lingered near the side door she had held open. The latch still felt familiar under her fingertips, a tactile reminder of timing, attention, and the quiet decisions that had saved lives. Her chest tightened with the same mixture of pride and solemnity she always felt after intervening when danger loomed unseen. This was not heroism in the public sense, it was heroism in the essential, invisible sense. She remembered her grandmother's voice, steady and deliberate, some things you do quietly, and they matter more than any story shouted from a stage. Tonight had been such a moment. The torn seam, the locked exit, the trembling assistant, the overlooked smoke, they had all converged in a pattern that only she had noticed. The night could have ended in tragedy. Instead, it had ended in revelation and safety, all because one small girl had paid attention when adults had looked away. From the shadows, she observed the woman from the stage speak with officials, calm and precise. Every gesture, every word, was infused with authority tempered by relief. The little girl's eyes traced the careful choreography, noting how the woman moved through the aftermath, ensuring accountability while reclaiming the narrative. The girl's flashbacks blended into the present, the factory fire, her parents' absence, the whispered lessons on vigilance and timing, each memory a brick in the foundation of the actions she had taken tonight. A quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. "You did more than anyone will ever know," the assistant whispered, a mixture of awe and lingering guilt in her tone. The girl only nodded, allowing the acknowledgement without comment. Recognition was not her goal. Action, awareness, timing, that was the reward. Everything else was peripheral. As the last officials departed, the girl stepped back into the corridor, the latch clicking softly behind her. She paused, letting the weight of the night settle fully in her chest. The gala, the sabotage, the near disaster, it was over. The woman's story would be told, the corruption exposed, and the headlines would capture only a fraction of the truth. But the girl knew what had really happened. She had held the line, silently and invisibly, when it mattered most. Turning away, she walked into the quiet night, a small figure carrying a knowledge and courage far beyond her years. The world might never know her name, might never understand the depth of her awareness, might never capture the subtle yet profound impact of her choices. But she didn't need them to. Tonight, she had saved the day, and that was enough. Every step she took was guided by the same lessons that had saved her before, and she moved forward with a quiet certainty. She would notice, she would act, and when the time came, she would hold the line again.